is it in these times of the computer now and with all these, you can get all these books now online, you can get them digitized. Do you use digital books as well, or aren't they as good for you?
Oh, they're wonderful. I mean, that's what's happened. I mean, two things have happened. One is that there's a vast array of published printed books online in the Gutenberg project and the Library of Congress project and so on, free, usually PDFs, everything early, sort of 19th century backwards, and many modern books. So my library has exploded. I mean, it's 100 times this size, because you can just type in a bit of a text that you remember or something, and you'll find wonderful things. So Sarah's particularly good at hunting for books and giving them to me, but I have a collection of PDFs of books as well. And the other thing, of course, is that it's made my subject index rather redundant, because now, for example, I'm writing a book on enchantment, and I've got a number of quotations I've gathered over the years on enchantment, but I just looked up enchantment on the web, found a dictionary, which gave me dozens of wonderful quotations. So this is the kind of TARDIS at the center of my universe, but outwards, spreading out from it now for anyone, is this whole world of books, a sea of books. The last thing I'd perhaps like to comment on is that book collecting and going to secondhand bookshops not only was a great pleasure, it reminded me of fishing. You know, you go out full of, what'll I catch today? And I'll go to that. And you had special bookshops with special parts of those bookshops which you'd go to, knowing that that's where you'd find the trout or book. And there it was. But it was the serendipity. That's why, for example, I love the Cambridge University Library as a research library more than even the Bodleian at Oxford, because it's a serendipitous library. It's arranged, it's an open stack library, and you can go to a collection and find books you didn't expect, whereas in Oxford you tend to need to know what the book is and then you order it. But going to these secondhand bookshops, particularly in Hay-on-Wye and elsewhere, and a lot of them closed now, of course, but the extraordinary thing is they revealed worlds which have disappeared. Books, we think that, once a book is in a library, it's there for good. What I discovered is that libraries, not only are they very selective in what they have, but they are very temporocentral, because librarians are faced with this endless flow of books coming in. And so every 10, 15 years, they cull them, nasty word, but they kill them off, either by selling them off or by burying them in some remote archive where, if you know they're there, you can order them. But basically, that meant that the books that you see, if you go to, say, the archaeology and anthropology library in Cambridge or the other libraries, tend to be the last 20, 30, 40 years. When you go to Hay-on-Wye, the bottom shelves are filled with those kind of books. But if you go up on the ladder, along the top are Victorian books thrown out of American university libraries, collected by Richard Booth and put along the top shelves. And so I was introduced to Victorian anthropology and Victorian history, people like Stubbs and Maitland and all these people who had been forgotten by my colleagues, and the students would never encounter them. But these wonderful books, I wrote with my mother a whole book about Robert Chambers by accidentally discovering a little book by his brother about his life. So you discover lost worlds.
Yeah. I'm interested in this, and I think actually Booth now seems to be less like that than it used to be. But anyway, do you think that this is again, as an anthropologist now, looking across broadly, is this a thing of your background, or do you find the same sort of thing when you go east?
Well, you're right about Booth. I mean, Booth is gone anyway. He's dead, I think.
Mm.
and his bookshops have not what they were. And some years ago,
Yeah, absolutely.
that happened. There are I mean, I've made an interview with a Japanese book collector who had a very fine collection of books, but he was a specialist in Western books and he had a good collection. And a lot of my Japanese and some of my Chinese friends have quite reasonable. They have problems of space in Japan. You know, at home there's very little space, and often their offices are very crammed, and so on. So I suspect there's less of that book collecting, and it may be. I mean, it's a European habit because obviously you get very fine book collections all over Europe. I thought what you were going to ask me is whether this sort of book collecting was the sort of thing that younger people are doing now, my younger colleagues, and even, you know, my
I was going
grandchildren.
to ask that one. Yes.
I mean, I think I do argue with Sarah about this. I think that book reading is thriving and will continue to thrive, and that it's a different experience from reading books on the web. The sale of ebooks and Kindle books went and reading of them went up like that, and it's gone down. And the sale of actually books is going up and up and up, and more are being published. Although academic books are no longer being reviewed in serious journals much. So I think books will continue as something that people collect and treasure. But whether, I mean, my great good fortune is that I have the room and space to keep them. I see you have a collection behind you, but I don't know how many more you have hidden away in your house.
One place is full.
Yes, but many, I mean, some of my desperate friends used to pull up the floorboards and pile their books underneath the floorboards, but that runs into the problem of finding them again. Anyway, so books, but there's another funny thing, which is perhaps what I'll end on, is that I somehow feel guilty reading books now. I mean, I read books at night when I go to bed, and I read a bit of an academic book if I can each day, but somehow it feels like a sort of guilty pleasure. I should be doing something more active, like writing or editing or whatever. So I find it a little difficult to, and I also find it difficult to read for quite a long time, but that's perhaps because I'm getting older. Actually,
Okay.
the one last thing is on reading. I don't think even at universities people are given much advice about how to read, which they should be. I watched Keith Thomas reading, and he read in the way that Francis Bacon said. He said, you know, books shouldn't all be treated in the same way. Some books should be just flipped over, just gulped down, as it were, in a few minutes. Some books should be savored, and some should be really carefully read. And that's how Keith and others read. As you get older and you know more, you can read a lot of books very quickly indeed. You read diagonally down paragraphs. You stop at the top left and you read down to the bottom right, and you can read it in a couple of seconds. So you can see the drift of the argument if you read the first line. So you can read even quite a long book in 20 minutes or so and take out what you really want, gut it. But there are other books where the moment you start it, and obviously novels and those kinds of books, you have to read every sentence, and sometimes twice.